In this lecture, we're going to focus on how destructors work with inheritance. And suppose we have an inheritance hierarchy like we have been using all along in this chapter. So our base class is person, we have the engineer class which is publicly inheriting from person, and we have a civil engineer class which is inheriting from engineer publicly. So when we create a civil engineer object, we have seen that the base part is built first. So we are going to build the person part of us, we are going to build the engineer part of us on top of that, and we are going to build the civil engineer part of us on top of that. So the constructors are going to be called in this order. We will call the person constructor first, engineer constructor after that, and then a civil engineer constructor after that to set up our civil engineer object. The thing I want you to see in this lecture is that the structures are called in the reverse order to that. So the most specialized destructor is going to be called first, then we're going to destroy the engineer part of us, and the person part of us is going to be destroyed last. So we are going to construct things in this order from the base part to the most specialized one, and then we are going to destroy things in this order. So the structures are going to be called in the reverse order than the constructors. That's the message I want to convey here. And we're going to set up a simple example to play with this. We're going to create a civil engineer object, and we're going to see the order in which these things are called. And let's head over to Visual Studio Code and actually do this. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is Inheritance and Destructors. We are going to be reusing the code from a previous lecture. I don't think the last lecture is a good example because we don't have a civil engineer class. So we are going to go to the lecture before that and use the code from our lecture on copy constructors with inheritance. That's going to give us all the classes. We have person, engineer, and civil engineer, and we need that in this lecture here. So let's grab all these things. We're going to copy them and put them in our current object, which is Inheritance and Destructors. And we are going to open this in Visual Studio Code, and it is going to be our starting point here. So we have person, engineer, and civil engineer. Let's see what we are doing in the main CPP file. We can take out all the junk here, or we can leave in the civil engineer object we are creating here, and we're going to see how the constructors and destructors are called. We're going to go to person and make sure we have a constructor and we have a bunch of constructors and let's go to the CPP file and see that we have messages in our constructors. This is really what we expect, but we want to also put a message in the destructor. Let's say stdc out and say destructor for person called. This is going to do. We're going to go in our engineer class. We're going to see that we have a bunch of constructors. We have a destructor here. We're going to hop over in the CPP file and make sure we take out the bad code here because we don't really need that. We only need good code. And we make sure that we have output statements in our constructors to know when they are called. Looks like we are good. We're going to put an stdc out statement in our destructor for engineer called. This is going to do. And we are going to hop over in our civil engineer class. We're going to have a bunch of constructors. We're going to have a civil engineer destructor. We can go in the CPP file and make sure that we have output statements in our civil engineer constructors. Looks like we are good here. We can take out all the bad code we don't need. And we are going to put a message in our destructor here. So let's do that. The destructor called for civil engineer. I think this is going to be good enough. Let's go back and make sure we have the same messages here for engineer. And we have a destructor for person called message. And we're going to try and run the code and see how constructors and destructors are called. This is the order we want to make sure we understand. If you want, you can even use a debugger to follow things, but I am not going to do that here. I am just going to build and show you the output statements. Hopefully that's going to be proof enough that things happen in the order that I just described in the slides. The build is good. We can clear. We can bring up a PowerShell window and then clear. And we're going to run rooster. we're going to see that the constructor is going to be called for person, for civil engineer, and you're going to see that things are going to happen from the most base constructor to the most specialized constructor. So we are going to call person, engineer, and civil engineer, but you're going to see that destructors are going to be called in the reverse order. The most specialized destructor is going to be called first, then we're going to call the destructor for engineer, then we're going to call the destructor for the base class. So things are going to be happening in reverse order. We will build things starting from the base and then finish by the most specialized class, which is doing inheritance, and then we're going to call the destructor for the most specialized class first, and then the destructor for the most base class is going to be called last. You should really make sure you understand this, because sometimes your things are going to be depending on this order, and you need to understand this, and this is really the main message here, that the destructors are really called in the reverse order than the constructors. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to see that we can actually reuse names in our inheritance hierarchy, and we're going to see how that works out in the next lecture. So go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.